Wyoming Territory, February 1872. The wind howled through the canyon like it was carrying ghosts, tearing across the flat stretch of snow-covered land just south of Sweetwater Station. Weston Darrin had never heard silence this loud before. His horse, Cody, moved slow through the drift, hooves crunching over frozen snow, steam rising from his flanks. Weston spotted her just beyond a bend of frost-bitten brush, crumpled near a half-frozen creek bed. At first he thought she was dead. Her dress was torn, blue with cold, her hands wrapped around something invisible. It was not until he got off his horse and stepped closer that she stirred. "Ma'am," his voice cracked from the dry wind. "Are you all right?" Her head lifted, pale, cracked lips. Dirt streaked down her face like she had not had water in days. "Please," she rasped. "Just food." Weston pulled off his gloves, dug into his saddlebag, and pulled out the last biscuit he had. Cold and hard from the ride, but it was all he had left. He knelt and offered it to her. She stared at it like it was gold. "Take it," he said. Her hands shook as she took it. She did not eat it right away, just held it like she could not believe it was real. He watched her a moment, eyes narrowing. "You out here alone?" Her shoulders trembled. She looked up, eyes wide with something deeper than fear. "No," she whispered. "My baby, she's still out there. I had to stop. I could not carry her anymore." Weston's gut went cold in a different way. He stood, eyes scanning the land, but it was just snow and trees and the wind throwing up dust. "Where?" he asked. She pointed with a shaking hand toward a thicket of trees about 200 yards away. Weston turned to his horse. "You stay here. Rest. I will find her. But eat the biscuit," he said, already mounting up. "I will bring your child back." He rode hard, pushing Cody through the trees. He had no trail, just the direction she had pointed and the kind of desperate hope that made a man forget the cold biting through his coat. Halfway through the trees he heard it, barely there. A soft, broken cry. He leapt off Cody and followed the sound on foot. There, beneath a collapsed pine bough, was a bundled shape wrapped in a thin gray blanket. A tiny hand moved. Weston's heart slammed against his ribs. He reached down, pulling the child up into his arms. The baby was so light it felt like the wind might carry her away. He wrapped his coat around her and turned back fast. When he rode out of the tree line, the woman was still sitting there, her hand over her mouth, eyes locked on him. When he slid down and placed the baby in her arms, she cried without sound, big, shaking sobs that rattled through her bones. She choked. "I thought she was gone." Weston crouched beside her. "She is cold, but she is breathing strong," he said. "What is her name?" "Abilene," the woman whispered. "I am Beatrice Dalton." Her eyes met his. There was something in them, some mixture of disbelief and gratitude and pain that had not yet faded. "Weston Darrin," he nodded. "You are safe now. Both of you." Beatrice curled around Abilene, rocking her gently. Weston stood and looked around. Snow was still falling, slow and steady, but the worst of the wind had passed. "You cannot stay out here," he said gently. "There is a cabin about 3 miles west. Belonged to a trapper who died last spring. I can get you there." Beatrice looked from him to the horizon, then back to him. We were headed south. I was trying to get to Fort Bridger, but the wagon train left without us. I got sick. They would not wait." Weston clenched his jaw. "You were traveling alone. My husband died last summer. Fever took him in Kansas. After that, it was just me and Abilene." Weston nodded once. "All right. Let us get you warm. We can talk about what comes next later." He helped her onto Cody, then lifted Abilene into her arms. He walked beside the horse, leading them through the snow as the sun began to dip low behind the ridgeline. The cabin was small, but solid. He had used it himself once or twice during long rides. He lit a fire while Beatrice sat near the hearth, holding Abilene close. Weston boiled water, found a tin of beans in the cupboard and set them to heat. She did not say much, just kept looking at her baby, whispering soft things to her that only a mother could say. When Abilene finally slept, Beatrice laid her down in a folded blanket near the fire. She stood slowly and walked over to the table where Weston had set out food. "You saved her," she said. Her voice was stronger now, but her eyes were glassy with tears. "You gave me your last biscuit. You did not even ask who I was." "You looked like you needed help," Weston replied. That was enough. She stared at him for a long moment. "There are not many men like you left." Weston gave a small shrug. "I just did what was right." Beatrice stepped closer. "I do not know how to repay you." "You do not have to," he said, his voice low. "I am just glad I was there in time." A quiet settled between them. The fire crackled. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside it was warm. Beatrice sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the tin cup he had filled with tea. Her eyes never left his face. "You are not a rancher," she said after a while. "Not with hands like that." "Was a scout," Weston answered. "Did courier work for the army. Now I mostly trap, ride mail when it is needed. Never stayed in one place too long." She nodded slowly. "Maybe it is time you did." He looked up at her. Her eyes were steady now, calm. There was something else there, too, something neither of them had expected. Weston smiled a little. "Maybe it is." By morning, the snow had stopped. Pale sunlight filtered through the warped window panes, casting a soft glow across the cabin's plank floor. Weston had slept light in the corner, his rifle within reach, boots still on. He stirred at the sound of quiet humming. Beatrice sat near the hearth, rocking Abilene gently in her arms. The baby's cheeks were pink with returning warmth, tiny lips moving as she suckled on a strip of softened cloth, dipped in warm milk Weston had coaxed from the last of the dried goat's milk tin. The fire had burned low, but she'd kept it alive through the night. "You didn't sleep," Weston said quietly, rising and shrugging into his coat. "I'll sleep later," Beatrice answered, her voice clearer than the night before. She wanted to eat every hour. I wasn't going to risk her getting cold again. He knelt beside the fire, added a pine log and coaxed the embers until the flame caught. The warmth deepened, filling the small room with a steady crackle. "You can rest now." "I'll take her for a while." Beatrice hesitated only a moment before extending the bundled child. Weston took her carefully, one arm supporting her weight while the other tucked the blanket under her chin. She stared up at him, eyes still unfocused but calm. Her breath came easy. "She's stronger already," he murmured. "She's like her father," Beatrice said, folding her hands. "Stubborn as a mule when she wants to live." Weston didn't ask about the man. The way she said it told him enough. "She'll need more than dried milk soon," she added, glancing to the small stores in the cupboard. "We're short on everything." "I'll ride to the station," Weston said. "There's a trader there who owes me a favor. He might still have some preserves and cornmeal left from the last freight wagon." Beatrice looked toward the window. "That's a full day's ride, even fast." He shifted Abilene gently in his arms. "You'll be safe here. The walls hold heat, and I'll stack more wood before I go. I'll be back before dark if Cody takes the trail well." She met his eyes, and something in her face changed, no longer guarded but still searching. "I'm not used to someone staying," she said. "I don't intend to leave you out here alone." Beatrice rose slowly. "There's a rifle in the corner." "I know how to use it." Weston gave a quiet nod. "I figured you did." He handed Abilene back to her, then moved to gather his things. Before he opened the door, he turned back. "If you hear anything strange, don't light the lantern right away. Just wait. I'll give 2 knocks." Beatrice wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped toward the fire. "I'll remember." The door creaked open and the cold met him like a slap. He mounted Cody and rode west, the wind pressing against his coat, snow crunching beneath hooves. By late afternoon, the sun angled low behind the ridges, painting the land in muted gold. He returned with a sack tied behind his saddle, flour, dried apples, a tin of molasses, and a small bundle of wool for the baby. The trader had given more than Weston expected. When he pushed open the cabin door, warmth spilled out to meet him. Beatrice was kneeling beside the fire, drying cloths near the hearth. She looked up as he entered. "You came back," she said, her breath catching faintly. He set the supplies on the table. "I told you I would." She crossed the room and untied the sack, fingers brushing over the folded wool. "This is more than I thought you'd find. I traded the mule blanket from my pack. Won't need it now, the weather's warming." Beatrice opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. She turned and stirred a pot he hadn't noticed simmering near the coals. "I found some dried onion in the back shelf," she said. "Made a stew. Thought maybe you'd be hungry." He sat at the table, watching her ladle the thick broth into 2 tin bowls. Her hands no longer shook. Her hair was still tangled, but it had been pulled back with a strip of cloth. Something about her posture had changed, less weight in her shoulders, more steadiness in the way she moved. As they ate, silence settled over them. Not the frayed quiet of desperation, but the simple stillness of two people who had nothing to prove. After a while, she set her spoon down. "When the wagon train left me, I thought that was the end of us. I kept walking because I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I just kept moving, maybe someone would see us before it was too late." Weston leaned back, folding his arms. "They didn't, but I did." Beatrice looked over at him. "You don't ask many questions. I figure if there's something you want to say, you will." She nodded once. "I grew up near Topeka. My family worked a small holding corn, chickens, a few hogs. When the drought came, there wasn't enough to keep going. I married Nathan because he had a plan to head west, said Wyoming had land enough to breathe again." Weston's gaze held steady. "You believed him." "I did. And I'd do it again. He was a good man, just got sick too soon." They sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the wind had died. The only sound was the soft breathing of the baby curled in a wool-lined crate near the fire. Weston stood and crossed the room, checking the latch on the door before drawing the heavy bar across it. "I'll stay in the chair tonight," he said, "just in case the weather turns again." Beatrice didn't argue. She reached for a blanket, folded it, and laid it over the back of the chair. As he settled in, she lingered by the hearth, arms crossed, eyes on the flames. "If I get back on my feet," she said slowly, "I'll need to find work. Sewing, maybe, or cooking if someone's hiring." "You've got time to think on that," Weston replied. "You're not alone anymore." She didn't answer right away, then softly, "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to know yet." She turned, her face half lit by firelight, and for the first time her expression held something close to rest. "I'll try," she said. He nodded once, then leaned his head back. As the fire burned low and the shadows stretched long, the silence between them no longer felt like something broken. It felt like something beginning. The sky turned soft with spring, though the morning still held the bite of frost. Snowmelt ran slow from the hills, carving thin silver lines through the thawing earth. Each day, Weston brought in more firewood, patched the roof with whatever scrap he found behind the cabin, and set traps in the low draws where rabbits had started moving again. He didn't speak much while he worked, but he always made sure Beatrice saw where he set the traps and which berries to avoid near the west slope. Beatrice spent long hours by the table with needle and thread, mending a shirt of his that had seen too many winters. She'd found a spool of faded blue tucked in the bottom of her satchel, and though the stitches weren't fine, they were steady. Abilene slept more now, her cheeks fuller each morning. Weston had carved a cradle out of pine scraps and lined it with burlap. Beatrice never said anything about it, but she moved the cradle beside her bed each night. One afternoon, as wind rolled gentle through the open shutters, Beatrice folded the last of the washed linens and leaned against the doorframe, watching Weston scrape bark from a branch he'd hauled in. "You always been alone out this way?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Had a brother once. Younger. Took a bullet near Laramie defending a man who wouldn't do the same. After that, I figured I'd rather trust the land." Beatrice stepped outside, barefoot on the warm planks. "Didn't think you'd ever say that much in one breath." Weston gave a short huff. "You asked." "I did." She lowered herself onto the stoop beside him. "I had a younger sister, Mary. She married a preacher and moved to Missouri. We wrote letters for a while, then the war came and the mail got slow. I haven't heard from her since." Weston looked over at her, the knife still in his hand. "You think she made it through?" "I don't know," Beatrice said, folding her knees to her chest. "I try to remember her laugh instead of wondering." He nodded once, then went back to shaving the branch down clean. She watched the movement of the blade, steady and sure. "You ever miss the road?" she asked. "Not yet." He paused. "That surprise you? I thought maybe you'd start pacing once the snow cleared." "I've had enough miles under me to know when I've found better ground." Beatrice turned her head slowly toward him. "And is this better ground?" He set the branch down, wiped the blade clean against his pant leg and met her eyes. "I reckon it is." They sat like that for a while, the hush between them stretching out, filled only by the rustle of wind through the dry grass. She leaned back on her hands. "Abilene started watching the light through the rafters," she said. "Tracks it with her eyes. I think she'll be strong." "She already is," Weston said. Beatrice smiled, faint but true. "You've been good to her." Weston's jaw tightened, but there was no tension in it. "She's easy to be good to." Beatrice let her gaze drift toward the ridge. "When the snow first came down, I thought I'd die out there with her. I kept walking because I didn't want her last sight to be of me giving up. I didn't expect anyone to come." "I didn't expect to find anyone," he said. She looked back at him. "But you did." "I did." The wind quieted. Somewhere in the trees a hawk called out once, then fell silent. "I don't know what kind of life I can build," she said. "Not with what little I've got." "You've got plenty," Weston said, his voice low. "More than most." Beatrice didn't speak right away. Then, softly, "I want a place where she can grow without fear. I want to wake up and not wonder if the roof will hold or if I'll have to beg for work to feed her." Weston reached for the carved branch and held it out to her. "This is for her. When it dries, I'll notch it and string it with twine. She can hang it above her cradle, something to look at when she wakes." Beatrice took it, ran her fingers over the smooth grain. "You made this for her." "I made it because I was thinking about her. That's not quite the same." She swallowed. Her voice caught just once. "No one's ever done that." He stood, brushing off his hands. "You'll need help with planting if you want to stay through summer. There's land behind the ridge that holds water. Corn might take." Beatrice rose too, holding the branch close to her chest. "You planning on helping?" "I'm not leaving," Weston said. "That's what you meant to ask." She stepped toward him, not fast but certain. "I didn't think I needed anyone," she said. "I still don't, not to stay alive, but I want someone who knows what it means to stay." His voice was quiet. "I do." For a long breath, neither of them moved. Then Beatrice lifted a hand and touched the edge of his collar. "I believe you." Weston leaned in just enough that their foreheads met, the air between them still and warm. Inside, Abilene stirred and gave a soft, contented sigh. Beatrice didn't move away. "When spring fully breaks, we'll start again." He nodded against her. "Together." And for the first time in a long while, the sky above them felt like it might hold steady. By early May, the stream behind the cabin ran full, its banks thick with new grass and the first yellow blossoms of prairie groundsel. The air carried the scent of thawed earth and wet pine. Weston had tilled a long patch of soil on the south slope, where the sun touched longest. Beatrice stood beside the furrow with a satchel of seed, her sleeves rolled and skirt tied above her boots. Her hands were already dark with soil from the hours they'd spent working rows together. "Your shoulders'll burn if you keep it bare like that," she said, glancing over as Weston stooped to straighten a rock-lined border. He wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Sun's welcome after all that cold. I'll take a little sting if it means things'll grow." Beatrice knelt in the dirt, tilting her head toward the open land. "It's strange, planting something and knowing you won't see it through unless you stay." "You planning on leaving?" Weston asked, not confrontational, just quiet. "No," she pressed a kernel into the soil. "Just not used to thinking that far ahead." The wind stirred her hair loose from its knot. She didn't fix it. Weston poured a line of water from the pail along the trench, careful and slow. "You've got good hands for this." "Steady." Beatrice gave a small laugh, the kind that didn't rise far in her throat. "I'd never sewn a straight hem before last winter. Now you're telling me I've got a farmer's touch." "It's not about straight lines," Weston said, standing. "It's about knowing when the ground's ready." Beatrice looked up at him, her fingers stained and her knees damp from kneeling. "And you think we're ready?" "We're here," he said. "That counts for something." They finished the last row in silence, save for the scrape of trowels and the trickle of water. When the work was done, Beatrice stood and wiped her hands on her apron. Weston carried the tools back to the shed and she followed, her steps slow. Inside, the air was cool. Dust hung in narrow shafts of light breaking through the slats in the walls. Weston set the trowel on the bench, then turned. Beatrice was watching him, not in hesitation, but with something measured. "I had a dream last night," she said. "I was back in the house where I was born. My mother was setting bread to rise, and I was small again. But I knew it wasn't real because Abilene was crying in the next room." Weston leaned against the post. "You wake after." I stayed a while, just listening. It was quiet there. "I don't remember quiet like that." He didn't speak, letting her words settle. "I think I've been waiting for something to go wrong," she said. "That's what grief does, makes you afraid of stillness." He stepped forward, not touching her, just close enough she could feel the warmth of him. "What if it doesn't go wrong?" he asked. "Then I'll have to learn how to live without looking over my shoulder." "You've already started," Weston said, his voice low. Beatrice looked down at her hands. "Sometimes I catch myself smiling, not because of anything big. Just watching her blink at the light or hearing you chop wood in the morning. That's what most of life is," Weston said. "Small things done right." She exhaled, like letting go of something she hadn't noticed holding. "I don't want to keep waiting for the next loss." "You won't have to," he said. "Not while I've got breath in me." Beatrice looked up, and this time her eyes didn't carry weight. They carried want, plain and unhidden. She stepped forward and rested her hand on his chest. "I don't need saving anymore," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I'd still walk beside you if you'll let me." She leaned in, their foreheads meeting, not tentative now, but sure. "I'll let you," she whispered. From the cabin, Abilene's cry broke the stillness, sharp and certain. Beatrice smiled against him, then pulled back and turned toward the sound. "I'll get her," she said. "But you'd better wash up if you plan on holding her after all that dirt." Weston watched her walk back through the tall grass, her hair catching the sun. He looked to the furrows they'd planted, the dark earth waiting for life. Then he followed. The soil had opened. The ground had taken, and something stronger than survival had begun to root. The first rain came before dawn, soft at first, then steady as it drummed against the roof. Inside the cabin, the air held the scent of damp wood and cooling ash. Beatrice stood near the table, tying off a bundle of dried sage with twine she'd saved from a feed sack. Weston had gone out early to check the traps and had not yet returned. Abilene babbled from her basket, her voice rising in curious tones as she tested sound. Beatrice smiled as she crouched beside her, brushing a thread of hair from her daughter's brow. "You're growing too fast," she murmured. "I can barely keep you in sleeves." A rustle near the door pulled her attention. Weston stepped inside, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He carried a brace of rabbits and a lopsided grin. "Trapline gave more than I expected," he said, unbuttoning his coat. "Two fat ones and one clever enough to chew through the twine." Beatrice stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "We'll salt one for later, the rest I'll cook tonight." He hung his coat near the hearth, then glanced toward the cradle. "She's louder every day. She's found her voice. I expect she'll have plenty to say when the time comes." Weston crouched beside the basket and offered a finger. Abilene wrapped her hand around it, eyes wide with wonder. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about the land past the ridge." Beatrice moved to the cupboard, pulling out the salt jar. "What about it? It's good ground. Flat, no stones. Wouldn't take much to raise a small barn there, maybe a pair of milk cows, one plow horse." She looked over her shoulder. "You want to stay here for good? I want to build something with you, not just patch what's left behind." Beatrice stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You're certain?" "I've been certain since the snow started to melt." She leaned against the table, folding her arms. "I don't have much to offer. I'm not asking for much. Just your hand and the promise we'll walk through whatever comes next together." Beatrice looked down at her hands, the knuckles calloused, nails ragged. They'd once been soft. Now they bore the marks of survival. She thought of Kansas and the road west, of all that had come undone. Then she looked up and her eyes steadied on his. "I'll marry you," she said, "if you'll promise to leave the past where it's buried." "I already have," Weston said. They didn't rush the wedding. There was no preacher nearby, and no neighbors for miles. But a traveling circuit rider passed through the station 3 weeks later, and Weston rode out to find him. The man came with a worn Bible and a saddlebag full of letters he hadn't yet delivered. They stood beneath the cottonwood behind the cabin, with Abilene bundled in Beatrice's arms and the stream running bright beside them. The vows were simple, the words old and plain. Beatrice's voice caught once, but she didn't falter. Weston's hand never left hers. When it was done, the preacher tipped his hat and rode south, and the three of them stood alone again on the edge of the clearing. That night, they ate rabbit stew by lamplight. Beatrice wore a blue ribbon Weston had found at the trading post. She hadn't asked for it, but he'd seen the way she lingered near the bolts of cloth and knew it would mean something. Later, after Abilene had been laid down, they sat on the porch with a blanket across their knees, the last light of day softening the hills. "I used to think peace was something you had to chase," Beatrice said. Weston looked out at the trees, their edges silvered in the dusk. "Sometimes it waits for you instead." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "I didn't know men like you existed. I didn't know I'd find a woman who'd make me want to stop moving." They sat quiet after that, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. When the chill deepened, they went inside, and Weston bolted the door behind them. Through summer, the house grew fuller. Weston built a lean-to for wood and a pen for the 2 goats they bartered from a rancher passing through. Beatrice planted herbs in a cracked kettle and hung them by the window. Abilene took her first steps on the packed earth outside the door, barefoot and laughing like she had never known cold. When the harvest came, it was small but enough. Weston stood with a sack of corn on his shoulder while Beatrice sorted dried beans by size, humming a tune she hadn't sung since Kansas. They preserved what they could and shared what little extra they had with a young couple who'd lost their home to fire. Winter returned, but it didn't catch them unprepared. The cabin was sealed tight, the woodpile stacked high. On long nights they read from an old almanac Weston had found, and Beatrice stitched clothes from flour sacks. Abilene learned to say Mama and Papa and pointed to the stars when Weston carried her outside to look at the sky. Years passed, quiet and sure. They added a second room, then a porch with 2 chairs. Weston taught Abilene how to track rabbit prints in fresh snow, how to hold a rifle without fear. Beatrice taught her the names of birds, how to mend a seam, and how to speak with grace even when the world tested her. They didn't speak often of the wagon train or the creek bed or the hunger that once hollowed them. Those things lived behind their eyes but not in their days. One evening, years later, Weston sat beside the hearth while Beatrice braided her daughter's hair. The firelight caught the lines near his eyes and the silver in her braid. Abilene was nearly grown, tall and strong with her mother's steadiness and her father's quiet eyes. "You still glad you stayed?" Beatrice asked, not looking up from the braid. Weston reached for her hand and kissed her knuckles, the same ones that once trembled from cold. "Every day," he said. Beatrice smiled, and Abilene rolled her eyes with the fond exasperation of a girl who had watched her parents love each other without falter. Outside, the wind moved gentle through the trees, and inside, the warmth never left. The cabin held laughter, the soil held roots, and the past once so heavy lay quiet beneath the weight of all they had built, together.